I'm very excited to be announcing our next presenter. We don't like to make it easy for ourselves at IACCM. Don't know whether you've noticed, but we have a Zoom session now. So we are Zooming in Sanjay Pradhan, and I'm hoping when I've finished my little introduction of Sanjay that he'll be there on screen. Sanjay is the CEO of the Open Government Partnership. The Open Government Partnership was founded in 2011 to provide an international platform for domestic reformers committed to making their governments more open, accountable, and responsive to citizens. And today there are 96 OGP governments. Tim and I were fortunate enough to be invited to present at a conference in the Netherlands, Open Contracting Partnership Conference. And Sanjay spoke there, and both Tim and I were very moved by his story. Following on from Sanjay's introduction and Sanjay's presentation, we are entering into the great debate, and you'll see that, or the big debate, you'll see that in your brochures. What we're attempting to question in that debate is the ethics around the technologies that are being implemented today. But of course, ethics goes again to the heart of the mission of IACCM. We're about the quality and, importantly, the integrity of trading relationships. And of course, transparency plays an enormous part as far as integrity is concerned. So Sanjay joined the Open Government Partnership back in May 2016 as their Chief Executive Officer. And he brings a wealth of open government and innovation experience to the role. He previously served in 3 senior positions at the World Bank as Vice President for Leadership, Learning and Innovation, Vice President of the World Bank Institute, and Director for Governance. Whilst at the World Bank, Sanjay tirelessly promoted open development. He led the World Bank's governance and anti-corruption strategy, launched a global partnership for social accountability, incubated ICT-mediated citizen feedback to improve governance, initiated open contracting with partners, and rolled out a flagship collaborative leadership for development program to help government and civil society leaders undertake collaborative actions. During his tenure at the World Bank, Sanjay gained extensive experience working in Africa, South Asia, Europe, and Central Asia. So it is my absolute pleasure to welcome Sanjay today. Thank you very much, Sanjay. We're sorry that you couldn't be here with us in person, but we're delighted that you're here with us virtually, and looking forward to your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that very kind introduction. Can you hear me properly?
We can.
Okay. It's a real pleasure to connect with you. I wish I could have been there in person, but at least good to connect with you through technology. So that was a very kind introduction. What I wanted to talk to you about was this topic of opening government, in particularly opening contracts, and how that can generate very powerful dividends for businesses like IACCM. And how in that process, businesses have a very important role to make that happen. So to share that with you, I want to begin with a story. I want to begin with a story of Ukraine and Ukraine's story of open contracting. So for this, I take you to this system of corruption that has historically persisted in Ukraine. So, you know, in Ukraine, there's been an entrenched system of corruption where powerful oligarchs have captured the public procurement process through shady, corrupt deals. And if you go back to 2014, just as a baseline, you find that Ukrainian media was talking of scandalous tales of highly inflated prices for public procurement, public contracts, multi-million-dollar kickbacks on infrastructure projects, inflated prices for day-to-day purchases. So for instance, fruits and vegetables were being procured at $75 a kilo. and roads were being constructed at the cost of $3.75 million per kilometer. That was the degree of corruption. So this was in the context of a system like that, in the immediate aftermath of the revolution of dignity on the Maidan in March 2014, a set of reformers came together. Reformers from civil society, Yuge Bugaev. There was reformers from government, the deputy minister, Max Fodio. And then there were private sector reformers, private sector entrepreneurs that came together because in the aftermath of the revolution, they wanted to make a real impact in fighting corruption. So they decided to focus on overhauling the public procurement system. And to do this, what they did is they created a platform, an online platform, which is called Prozoro, which means transparency in Ukrainian. And this was developed with the help of the private sector in an open source platform. So what this concretely means is that all public procurement contracts through this platform are done transparently, so everyone can see. And all the contracts are disclosed in open data standards. So an ordinary citizen or civil society or an ordinary business can trace these contracts. The contracts are accessible to them. So in this context, they created this platform called Prozoro, and then they made a second generation platform, which is called Dozoro. And what Dozoro does is it allows ordinary citizens, civil society groups to flag violations with contract implementation that they see, which then obliges the government to respond to them. So this is the platform that they together built. And importantly, in terms of, I think, one of the themes that you're discussing there, this entailed collaboration across boundaries. So there was a very important role for government there. Government was resetting the rules of the game and disclosing contracts in open data standards. Private sector in this partnership had a very important role in building this platform and supporting the businesses and the contracting agencies and being a force together with the coalition. And civil society had a very important role in monitoring the contracts and flagging suspicious violations. They called this tripartite, it was a triangle of cooperation that resulted in this. Now, what have been the early results of this in Ukraine? The early results have been, first, that there was a survey of, there were 2 surveys done of private sector companies, one of 200 companies, one of 300 companies. And the companies, 80% of the companies reported a significant positive impact because of this Prozoro platform, Prozoro-Dozoro platform, where 80% reported efficiencies, reduction in time, efficiencies that they found, and new connections they found with other private sector companies. Another 82% of companies reported partial to significant reduction in their perception of corruption, their experience of corruption using this platform. There was a 50% increase in unique private sector companies that were, including small and medium enterprises, that started participating in the public procurement contract using Prozoro because of enhanced trust in the system. On the government side, there were fiscal savings from the Prozoro system, which has been estimated to be over $1 billion in 2 years. So for instance, there's been case studies which show a cancer clinic in one of the areas of Ukraine could offer free chemotherapy treatment for an additional month because of savings from the procurement of drugs. And the Dozoro platform I told you about, where citizens can flag suspicious violations, there have been 133,000 visits to this site. There have been 5,000 cases of suspicious violations that were flagged by citizens and civil society. About half of them have been resolved publicly. There have been 1,200 tenders that were changed because of this feedback mechanism. And about 20 firms, corrupt firms, are undergoing criminal cases, and 80 of them have been sanctioned. So just in a nutshell, in a context where one would ordinarily associate Ukraine with a captured state and a captured public procurement process. The European Bank for Reconstruction and Development now says that Ukraine is the recommended form of public procurement, and Ukraine won the public procurement award, including the Open Government Partnerships award 2 years ago. So this was just a quick example, a story to show two things. First, that there is a powerful business case from open contracting when contracts are done transparently and competitively. To take you with another example, in South Korea, when they went for electronic procurement in this way, it has been shown to have yielded dividends in South Korea of $6.6 billion. That's been the documented efficiencies that businesses have reported. And what it does, something like opening contracts, what it does is that when deals are made, behind closed doors, shady deals are made, it actually robs honest businesses of a fair chance to compete. For those of you who may have followed the Brazilian case, there's a Brazilian construction company called Odebrecht, which is now documented, and it has been convicted that it gave billions and billions of dollars in bribes. They had a dedicated bribes department inside the company. They gave bribes to top public officials for their elections. And when something for hundreds of construction contracts, and when that happens, honest businesses are deprived the opportunity to compete. And open contracting levels the playing field. That's why there's a powerful business case. But the second implication of the Ukraine case, or cases like this, is that there is an important role for collective action, where businesses must join forces with reformers in government and civil society to realize these dividends. So we saw in the Ukrainian case that there was complementary action by government creating the rules of the game, disclosing contracts, private sector creating the platform, civil society monitoring. But this complementary action becomes even more important because you're dealing with very powerful vested interests against opening up the system. The very powerful elites that benefit from corruption when things are done behind closed doors. And to illustrate this, let me take you to another case, the case of Peru. In the year 2000, under President Fujimori, there was his head of intelligence was Vladimir Montesinos. And Montesinos, actually it's a documented Harvard Business School case, where he gave and took bribes on behalf of President Fujimori. And the bribes that are shown, the sting operation, you can see bribes were given and taken across elites throughout society. So it involved elites in parliament, in the judiciary, in the media, in the executive, all over. And when you actually see the web of corruption that was woven in, you see that it's a very formidable political force that stands to benefit from the system. Now, confronted with this web of corruption, individual companies, individual citizens, individual civil society members feel helpless and hopeless in the face of these powerful entrenched networks. And that is why we need coalitions of integrity where reformers from government, business, and civil society find collective strength to overcome these formidable odds. And so we need government reformers, as we are seeing today in Bogota, Colombia, where they are disclosing, government reformers are proactively disclosing contracts for, let's say, school feeding programs where there was massive corruption, and exposing leakages. We need responsible private sector in this coalition. As for instance, I saw some years ago in Ghana, when I was working there, Newmont Mining decided to proactively publish its contracts, but also insisted on an open parliamentary validation proactively. And we need the third leg, which is civil society, to serve as watchdogs, as we saw from the Ukraine Dozoro case, where thousands of civil society members are now overseeing these contracts. So this is the coalition we need. And for this is where the open government partnership comes in, and other such platforms. So just to give you a quick background, the Open Government Partnership, or OGP, provides this multi-stakeholder platform for collective action. And a very quick background is that OGP was launched, as you heard, in 2011 on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly by 8 heads of states and civil society leaders. And in just over 6 years, 96 national and local governments have joined, along with thousands of civil society organizations. Private sector companies are involved in specific countries like Nigeria, like Indonesia. We want many more private sector companies to join. But what these government, civil society, and private sector companies do together is it's not a talk shop. It is a platform for taking very concrete commitments and actions in published action plans. So in the last 6 years, these government, civil society, and private sector have co-created 3,000 concrete actions or commitments which are published, and the progress against that is independently assessed. And within these commitments, open contracting is a very prominent growing area. So already about 30 national and local governments in OGP, together with civil society and private sector, have committed to open contracting. When you see 30 countries joining together, this is very encouraging. But what I want to leave you with is that this is just the start. Our vision should be to make open contracting a global norm, so that that becomes the default method of operation, so that backdoor deals are not struck to benefit corrupt companies and corrupt politicians, which robs citizens of basic public services, which robs honest businesses of fair deals. So this should be our vision, to make open contracting a global norm. But this will hit up against very formidable vested interests, as I mentioned. So how do we get there, and what's the role of businesses, for instance, in IACCM, to make this happen? Just to summarize, I would say there are 3 C's we need to turn this vision into a reality. The first C is we need credible action and compelling results. These 30 national and local governments that have committed, that's very good, but we need credible implementation, as we are starting to see in Ukraine. In Ukraine also, this will confront a lot of obstacles. The civil society member who launched this told me when we gave him the award 2 years ago, he said, "You see me today, you may not see me the next time, because I have threatened very powerful interests." That's what's at stake here. So we need credible implementation, and we need more governments to join this attempt at global norm of open contracting. We need more Prozoro stories. Prozoro, Ukraine is an attractive story, but we need a lot more if we have to galvanize stakeholders to take risks to make this happen. And so for this, I invite businesses, including IACCM partners, to join us. In this year, between now and August, 76 national and local governments will be developing their OGP action plans. We invite you to join in those countries to push for open contracting, and when it's adopted, to push for its credible implementation. So that's the first C, credible action with compelling results. The second C is, to make this happen, we need coalitions. You will find it's hard to do this on your own, and something like OGP provides a platform for complementary collective action. Join in with reformers from government and civil society to make this happen. And for the third C that this leads to, which must underpin all of this, is courageous, committed leadership. Ultimately, this requires a fight. It requires a fight for good business. It requires a fight for society. It requires a fight for integrity. And that requires a commitment to ethics that I think you will be debating. It requires a commitment to doing the right thing. I have presented to you a compelling business case for open contracting. That is important, why you should pursue it. But equally important to do this is because it's the right thing to do. It's the right thing for society. It's the right thing for integrity. For several years, I used to chair the World Forum for Ethics in Business, which WFEB it's called, which met annually at the European Parliament. And it involved all kinds of companies. And the underlying premise of WFEB is that businesses can be profitable and ethical. It was premised on the same foundation that Professor Michael Porter of the Harvard Business School talked about, shared value, which is that businesses can generate economic profits by simultaneously solving social problems, joining together with other stakeholders. In the case of open contracting, for instance, it involves joining forces to be profitable through open contracts, but also solve with other stakeholders societal problems like corruption in contracting. So I close by making this invitation that the real frontier today is for courageous leaders to join together, join forces in making a real difference. I'm reminded of my father, and that's the story I think I said in Amsterdam, which I won't go to now. But he was an anti-corruption fighter, first from government. When he was in my home state in India, he fought this against formidable odds. And then later he retired and he became a civil society activist. And he fought this literally till the day he died. The last day he died, the day he died, he fought a case in court against corruption in a road project. He won the ruling, but that very day he fell, he slipped and he died. And throughout his life, he had fought for this. And this is the fight. This is a fight for ordinary citizens. This is the fight for honest businesses. And we invite you to join this fight, because only when we join forces, we will ensure that governments deliver on that precious promise, the precious promise of government, their real contract, their real social and moral contract is to ensure they exist to benefit the citizens rather than themselves. This is the collective fight. We invite you to join this fight. Thank you very much.
Sanjay, thank you very much indeed. And we've got time for a couple of questions. If anybody has some questions for Sanjay, I'm sure there are probably some. I know I've got a few, but it would be great to get some from the audience beforehand. Any takers? Yes.
Thanks very much for the presentation. How does the open contracting arrangement take account of non-price factors in a selection? It's quite easy to see if 5 million is less than 6 million, but what about capability and skills and expertise?
Yes, so I think there is a whole methodology. I would refer you to, there is an entity that we built. This initiative we launched when I was in the World Bank Institute. And we created a whole entity which is called the Open Contracting Partnership. It's now an independent entity, and it answers exactly the same questions that you're raising. It looks and sees how, in fact, first of all, it's disclosing data in open data standards. And so people can assess for themselves, and they can ask questions whether it was only the price factor or whether there were non-price factors that were leading to the selection. It is not a panacea in answering both those questions using the platform. It's a transparency platform, which then enables stakeholders to ask the relevant questions, whether it is about what was the dominant weight of price versus non-price factors. But if you like, I would be very happy to connect you to the experts who in fact deal with this issue, which are found in the Open Contracting Partnership. There's a gentleman who heads it called Gavin Heyman, and his team is the one that looks into these issues.
Thank you. Any other questions? Yes. Okay, brilliant.
Hello, Sanjay. I was very interested to hear you talking about some of the problems in Ukraine, but it strikes me that transparency and some of the issues around transparency have a different profile in places like the UK, where transparency serves to deliver better services. I wonder if there is anything you could say around using open contracting to make things better rather than just about being against corruption?
Yes, so if you look at in UK itself, if you look at the London transit system, there is just the release of data on open data, which existed, but it was not open to citizens, release of data on train arrival times and train departure times, which through mobile apps and so on, empowered citizens, and is supposed to have yielded a lot of benefits to citizens. So I think, in Uruguay, release of data on health systems, on wait times and so on, there is all of a sudden empowered citizens to make much more informed health choices. So there is both, if I understood the correct question, important question correctly, there is a negative deterrent to opening of data, opening of contracts in terms of preventing corruption. But there is also a positive impact once data is released in terms of better delivery of services. Ultimately, that happens by empowering citizens with much more informed information on what services are being provided, so whether it's health services or transit services, so they can take better decisions. So transparency is both an antidote to corruption, but it's also a facilitator of better delivery of public services to citizens.
Sanjay, thank you. I think just one closing question from me. Perhaps I'll throw the cat amongst the pigeons and say, are there any justifications for non-transparency that you would see? You've mentioned the Open Contracting Partnership, and I know they've written a report, and I would commend that report to everybody on the myths around open contracting and transparency. But do you see any valid arguments against transparency?
People have argued at times that certainly some aspects of defense procurement, because it threatens national security, should be protected from something like this. I think one has to be very careful with arguments like this, because first, there's a lot of corruption precisely in defense procurement in a number of countries because it's cloaked. It's under the cloak of secrecy. But secondly, there have been very thoughtful practitioners in this area that have unpacked to reduce that space for non-transparency to its very minimum requirement. I think what's happening in a number of contexts, and this varies across countries, is that the default is of secrecy and the exception is openness. We need to reverse this. We need to make open the default and secrecy only when you can really show that it's really needed. So, I mean, obviously, transparency is no panacea. It is not a magic bullet, but I think it generates a lot of dividends. And so we should be aiming for that as a default. That's how I would put it.
Sanjay, thank you very much. As ever, a really inspiring presentation. It's great to see your face, and we hope to see you in person again very soon. Thank you so much for your time today, and I love it when technology works. Brilliant. Thank you.